Swami, Pratul, he's a manager. That's Aditya, Dipshika, and Gitali. So this is our team, and I thought I'll use this opportunity to do 30 seconds of a shameless plug. We are Deloitte, and we focus on, as a practice, we focus on social impact and sustainability, two parts to it. And impact is both for not-for-profit sectors and for profit sectors, and it's the same for sustainability. We have around 100 different practitioners in our team, everything from analysts, consultants, senior consultants, managers, ADs, directors. And we are probably the only team in India to have mindfully and thoughtfully built the practice on the basis of the people that we want. So our people are from TIS, our engineers, computer engineers, people who've worked at the grassroots level with organizations like Pradhan, people who've come from participatory action research, people who have a research mindset, but who also have a capability to go ahead and look at strategy. So that's the plug. I'll stop here, right? So today, the whole session is essentially in terms of what do we mean by social return on investment. And here I'll focus on a caveat. We will get into the technical details of social return of investment. So that's a promise. So we will get into calculations and we will say that how do those calculations matter and how do you quantify impact. That's the whole purpose of the session. The presentation is divided into two parts. The first part is essentially a lot of context, and I see fellow journeymen and women from the sector. So a lot of it would be already very, very familiar to you. So we'll quickly run through the context, first 7, 8 slides. The idea is to finish it in 5, 7 minutes. We can always take questions on those slides later, but the focus is to get to the meat or the core of social return of investment and why is it important, what's the context, and what are the things that civil society organizations in particular, or not-for-profit organizations in particular, will need to keep in mind, and why is it going to be increasingly important going forward, right? So that's the long and short of it. I'll probably hand it over to Pratul now, and Pratul, if you want to sort of take it up, and then we'll bring it in. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Swami. I'll be a little louder. And a very good morning to all the participants on the masterclass. So before we get into the session, we always do this sense check of who our audience is. And before we give you a preview of what the India's development sector is, we just want to get a quick sense of how are we interacting today. So how many of you are from the corporate CSR teams who are taking decision investments, talking to your board members, and driving social impact? Okay, just handful. Who are here from the implementing side? Social enterprise, for-profit, majorly. Anyone from philanthropy, ESG, impact investing? Maybe no one. But we've all heard of the term, right? Is that a yes or a no? Social return on investment. Amazing. So we'll try to keep the session curated to our audience, while the content is, as Swami said, very technical, but it is also to give you how some sort of calculations happen, how is impact being monetized, the whole concept of monetizing impact and representing in terms of a ratio. But quickly, just to look at why we are talking about impact measurement. So India's development landscape, if you see, is about 120,000 crores through the private sector funding. We are spending 8.3, but we are supposed to spend 13% of our GDP. And CSR, why, since we are on a CSR conference, is 27,800 crores. That's it, right? And this by we are all a part of somewhere. Either we are on the funding side or on the receipt side. And that's where impact measurement becomes extremely important, considering it has a direct mandate, regulatory, non-regulatory, but also on sustainable development goals, which India signed up for 2030. Swami, quick, maybe 40, 50 seconds on where the regulatory landscape within the CSR space is leaning towards when it comes to impact assessment or measuring impact, and why this audience needs to know this, even if they are not-for-profits or social enterprises.
So I think from where we sit, which is at Deloitte, where we do work a lot with regulatory institutions and agencies, we do get a certain sense of a horizon view saying that where are these developments going, right? So there are broadly three big factors that are coming in. One is that everyone's now looking at impact from the point of view of quantification. So this is not to say that the old style of going ahead and measuring impact, which is narrative, storytelling, stories of change, how do you use the theory of change and the log frame, and longer outcomes. It's not like they're not important, but what is happening is that the importance is getting really factored and almost firewall to say that please show it in numbers. That's one. Secondly, there is a mechanism or a set of regulatory ways in which they are trying to, or most of those regulations are trying to go ahead and expand the base of the pie. How much money is available for purpose organization. So if you refer to the previous slide, you will find that 32% is retail, which essentially means that people like you and me are getting involved in for-profit organizations. CSR is still 24%. So between a 24% and a 32%, it means that there needs to be a mechanism to involve common people for purpose, to look at outcomes, to look at impact. That's the second part. Third, as you can see, foreign funding has come down. It's come down to 20%. So which essentially means that you're having a gap, but it's getting filled up by retail. And of course, the CSR story is directly connected to India's growth story and development story, right? So the whole idea of deployability of funds, that case is made. How do you deploy the fund and how do you look at the return on investment, which is social return on investment, is what that entire quantification is all about. And that's the context, right?
And we validated this. So Deloitte this year went to 185 corporations, India, listed, non-listed, and we did a survey, primary, not secondary, to understand what's the appetite for impact measurement and what are certain challenges which they encounter while communicating impact. So clearly, majority of the pie said that there is lack of adequate impact measurement metrics. And the biggest motivation of conducting an impact assessment is to understand the social return on investment. And that's where this topic becomes extremely important for us to reflect upon and catch up on. Because sooner or later, your funders are going to ask you these metrics. The board members are going to ask you, we are putting in so much funding, what are we getting out of it? Because eventually we are leaning towards the global language of impact measurement and reporting. But then that also brings in a question. Can monetizing impact be a solution? India is a rich country with so many development sector challenges. We've seen so much transition in the way grant making happens, philanthropy is undertaken, CSR. So the whole concept of monetizing impact, and I'm not going to invite thoughts right now, but if you had to show me, say, a hands up or a hands down approach, how many of you would be interested or would be supporting the fact that should we monetize impact or not? Just a hands up. Still less, it's still not even 50%. But the emotions say that can impact be even monetized? Why should we peg a monetary value? Everything has a value, right? This laptop has a value, the coat I'm wearing has a value, an iPhone has a value. But how can impact have value? It's doing good for the society. Why are we involving business money into it? That's a thought we need to reflect on. Sorry. And there are equal hurdles in impact measurement space. So someone on the funding side, I understand we don't have anyone on the funding side today, is what I understand, but someone from the CSR space, can you read out what the funder challenges are? Someone from the CSR space.
I'm currently funding so many different projects, but I'm not sure about the total impact created.
Resonate to this thought? Yeah? Okay. Anyone from the social enterprise side who would want to read what the NGOs are saying?
All the NGOs are fighting for the same funding. How do I put my project on the same foothold as that of a total different sector?
Yes, no? We didn't speak to any one of you before writing this. Yeah? Okay. And policymakers, I think I'm going to read that out, that private sector funding has been encouraged through policy for so long, but how can we measure its unique impact? It does not need to be a conventional CSR program, right? Digital public infrastructure, how does one monetize that? Millions of transactions, money moving in, out. You're getting Namayatri, which is an easy cabs provider, right? So it's so much being done, but how are we monetizing that? And project beneficiaries, very rare someone is going to say that, but we still speak, we work with about 400, 500 NGOs all over India. And somewhere we got a common theme that project evaluators usually track project success basis their own metrics, right? I'm defining the MOU, I'm defining the project design, and we have little say in what has been beneficial for us. Not generic, specific. Yeah. So there are hurdles, and that's why we're in the room to understand how can we evaluate newer methods of impact measurement. And then now we segue into the main subject, which is understanding SROI. So what Swami said was our first 6-7 minutes was to just warm you up. It's like when you come into the gym, you want to do that mobility, you want to be prepped of what the real muscle training is going to be. But as professionals, we need to be cognizant of understanding why impact measurement is so critical in this space. Yeah? Great. So Swami.
You can now understand why he's literally flexing, right?
Right.
Jokes apart.
So Swami, if we had to define social return on investment in simple English language, it's just not even 3 sentences. It just says social return on investment is the value generated for every rupee invested in a project. SROI can be acromanized, so that one line is also gone. It's a framework for accounting and measurement. It includes social, economic, and environmental, right? So there's a word, direct beneficiary, indirect beneficiary, outcome, input, etc. But this is somewhere also integrating social, economic, and environmental dimensions. We've called it rupee. Globally, it's called dollar or pound in a project. So Swami, what's value? How does one talk about value?
So that's what we, at least in the consulting world, called as a wicked problem or a hairy problem, right? So if I go ahead and just do a round robin saying that, can you define value for me, right? Each one would define value in a different way. So there's no common understanding, common definition, common set of metrics of understanding value, right? And to further complicate it, and we'll make our own lives difficult, right? I can go ahead and measure the value in a fairly standard manner if it's equipment donated to a hospital. Let's say an X-ray or an MRI machine, etc. It's simple and straightforward. It's hard infrastructure, right? That value is done. But what are you going to do in order to measure the value where you have actually gone ahead and built the capacity and the capability and the agency? 3 different words, huh? Capacity, capability, and agency of Anganwadi workers, through a set of awareness campaigns or through a set of campaigns where they become champions of X or Y or Z, right? So long and short of it, the assumption that we make is that qualitative value cannot be measured and you can't put a number to it. The problem statement that we've taken here and unpacked it is that qualitative value can also be measured and a number can be put. Right? So first complication, what is value? That's a big, hairy, wicked problem. Second complication or a complexity is the fact that how do you measure qualitative value? Capacity, capability, agency. I'll add a third part. I'll complicate life for myself even further. social, economic, and environmental. So you are creating social value, but what if the economic value is not getting created? Or if you're degrading the environment? You're creating environmental value, but you're going ahead and keeping, let's say, X community from minor forest produce. Let's assume that, right? Those are complicated scenarios, social scenarios. But each one can be quantified in its own way. And that's the technical calculation that we are bringing to the table.
Okay. For every rupee invested in a project, which is multifold return calculations against every rupee spent. So this again, rupee is for the Indian context, but globally when it was arrived, you can customize it into the local currency of use in any country where the measurement is being figured out. So the framework is fairly, it's not as old as the OECDs or the UNGC Combat frameworks, which is being currently used. Fairly new, modern, was being inceptualized in the early 1990s from the Roberts Enterprise Development Funds and Harvard Business School. Then the major standardization which happened was in, as I said, it's not even like about 2 decades back, by Social Value UK, when they developed the guide to SROI. So they also hold official, so they are basically the nodal custodians to the framework. So for instance, I've been trained by Social Value UK on the practitioners program, where they actually run a gated exercise to give you that certification, like how you have a social audit certification, how you have certain CFA certification on social value, on social return on investment. Social Value UK is the nodal custodian agency, and they have resources in the public domain. You can always visit their website. Then it was pretty much, it went into its growth stage in the EU region, some sort of a bit in the philanthropy space in the US. It started getting adopted. Leading foundations went ahead and started measuring programs. And just to give you a caveat, in the global context, we don't have conventional CSR programs. It's more corporate citizenship. So it is not an apples to apples comparison, while we have a much structured program, Schedule 7 defined, thematic areas defined. And in the Indian context, it has seen early adoption. This is the decade where we are seeing SROI is a emerging need. A lot of our clients keep asking us if we can do SROI for some of their projects. And the future potential is, how can SROI be more democratized, taken to the civil society, make more trained professionals who can go ahead and adopt this methodology for efficient impact measurement. So now we'll get into the principles of calculating SROI. Now this is step 1. Before attempting any sort of an SROI exercise, what are certain key principles one needs to note? And they are set, they are defined, and they need to be put in practice. So the first approach is, how does one go ahead and involve all stakeholders? We're all from the sector. By stakeholder mapping, clearly it is your direct stakeholder, indirect stakeholder, institutional stakeholders, whoever are involved in the project design. Then it's to get a hold of understanding what sort of changes are taking place based on the work you are going ahead and supporting, which translates into a theory of change or a value map, which we'll show you on the subsequent slide. Value the things that matter. This is where the principle of putting a value comes in. So every outcome which you are measuring, every change which is taking a place in the beneficiaries or the project's life cycle has to put a value which is material and is accurate to be measured. Only include what is material, and do not overclaim, be transparent. These are pretty much 3 cross-cut with each other. You can't overclaim when you are calculating SROI. Today, I go to a government school. There are 3 funders working there, plus it's the policy. Can I say that all the impact is what I have generated? Loosely, there is attribution taken, but in real terms, there are multiple factors which are going ahead and creating a larger impact in the student, teacher, administration's life cycle. Verify the result. It's always important to conduct an independent assurance, like how you have a financial audit at the year end. An SROI report usually should be assured, validated by an independent agency. It could be professionals like us who are working in the space, who have the independent assurance providing capabilities, or it could be someone which has been certified by Social Value UK. Again, that's a different course, different program one can pursue, but to authenticate an end-to-end SROI, it has to be assured by a third party. Be responsive, always take timely decisions, because these are ratios. These are not stories. So these ratios help to communicate. Do I need to scale my program? Is something going wrong? Should I take immediate steps, etc.? Swami.
So just to sort of sum it up, these are great principles, and many of those principles are already being followed by civil society organizations, right? But there are a couple of things. One is do not overclaim, two is verify the results, and three, include what is material, right? So one can look at it as parameters, right? But there is a fundamental pivot. We've always looked at attribution equals impact. The fundamental pivot here is that it looks at both attribution and contribution. So the fact that there is a contribution element or a dimension being brought into every single project or program, which essentially means that for you to claim attribution for something in a specific geography, you'll need to identify that how much percentage of attribution can I take to myself, and how much of it is contribution. Could be community knowledge, could be existing government schemes, could be hard infrastructure, could be digital public infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So the whole idea of enablers, facilitators, and what are you doing? Who are the orchestrators, and how much of attribution can you take? So you have to now look at attribution as in combination or in alignment with contribution. That's the fundamental principle shift that's taking place.
Now we'll segue into indicative calculation sets. Yeah. So are we comfortable till now? In the interest of time, we're not doing a back and forth volley of questions, but do park some of these thoughts, because we will, of course, hold a quick Q&A. But is everyone with us? Yeah. Is the pace fine? Yeah. Okay. So SROI is a 5-stage broad process. A lot of it is intertwined with the principles we just discussed. The first one being establishing scope and identifying stakeholders. This is more around what's your scope, what sort of a stakeholder group you're working with. It could include everything, right? From the sector, geography, duration, the level of inputs you're going to put into the project, etc. The second is mapping outcomes and developing a theory of change. I am assuming that this is not a new sort of a, I won't call it a jargon, but it's a term which is being fairly used now. We also call it as an impact map or a value map. But a theory of change is now, you'll understand why it is so important and why some of your funders ask for it, or why some of the modern impact investing firms are asking for that sort of a development. Yeah. The third one is evidencing outcomes and assigning financial proxies. This is where the math comes in. This is where you start monetizing your impact. Then you establish the impact and the SROI ratio. And the last step is you are embedding SROI in organizational practices. It's basically going ahead, adopting it, absorbing it, and communicating through it. So it looks simple, this 5-stage process, but of course there are multiple sub-activities linked to it. Great. So what we've done is we've taken an indicative example. We've tried to look at this example fairly from an illustrative purpose to help you understand how, if one had to look at SROI, how would one do from step A to step C. So the first aspect which we will look through this example is on boundary setting and defining a list of people who will be a part of the project. So the example we've taken is that say client X or funder X has asked us to conduct an SROI study for a women entrepreneurship training program in pickle making in a rural Indian village, right? So it's fairly a simple ask. Pickle is a traditional savory. It is a knowledge which women possess. How can we help them generate more revenue, help them take them to market better? And that's the whole program. And if we had to go ahead and break it down of what the program is the problem statement first. That what is the impact created by Women Entrepreneurship Program? While it's more of a forward-looking statement, but we're assuming that the problem is that they have the skills, but they can't monetize it or they can't generate enough revenue from it, right? That's the problem statement in a rural Indian village. The indicative project details are that before the project, assuming there's a baseline, their real entrepreneurial income is 0. And after the project completes, their income becomes about 5,000 a month, right? So the input cost which the funder has put in, and this is independent of the increase in revenue, is 12 lakhs. 12 lakhs is the input which the program funder has put in. It could include capacity building activities, training them, helping them take them to better market. The target audience is going to be for 100 rural women, and the beneficiaries are women entrepreneurs, their families, the local communities. The secondaries are government agencies, the implementing agency, and some of the financial institutions around it, right? So that's the broad example we are going to pick for today. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to sort of give you a context, this is a study that we've done in real life. Dipshika is the one who's led that. She's actually worked with the SHG. We can't name the SHG for very obvious reasons. So this comes from our actual lived experience and our actual experience in that sense. So just a caveat. So it's not an imagined scenario.
Program design is clear, everyone? Program design is clear, right? So the first step we're going to go ahead and do is map outcomes and develop a theory of change. Theory of change, before, as you heard before, is also called as an impact map, value map, which consists of input, activities, output, outcome. Input is anything linked to your tangible, non-tangible resource which you put into a project to make it successful and take it to the last mile. It could be money, it could be your time cost, it could be knowledge, it could be any sort of, as I said, tangible, non-tangible, which will help you achieve the program success. Then there are linked activities to it. So say indicatively community outreach, onboarding of the beneficiaries, seed funding, training, and helping them do their project better. Now comes the tricky part. Always we hear a lot of the problem. What is an output? What is an outcome, right? So output is the quick, it's like you just had a banana, you got 100 calories, and you're ready to hit a set. Sorry, these are all gym examples because we went to the gym in the morning. But or it could be you had a black coffee and you just came into the room and you're ready to hear the first 20 minutes of the program. But yes, so output is the quick metric which you realize the moment the activities start. But it's the so what principle, right? If I've done a training, so what? I got the training, I'm more knowledgeable now, I can make the pickle, so what? I've made a good pickle. It's like a train, right? I've made the pickle, I've started packaging it, so what? Someone took me to market, has helped me do a good branding, so what? I can now sell it, so what? I get more income, so what? I can use it to study, I can use it to educate my children, so what? They become more aware. Yeah, so what? I also have money which I am saving, so what? So the so what chain continues, right? And that's where we need to demarcate and freeze on certain outcomes. So that's the difference between an output and an outcome. So for this program, and an outcome can be periodic, Swami. I think you should come in here. Short term, medium term, long term, right? Some are going to be realized in 1 year, some are going to be realized in 2 years, some are even 10-year based outcomes, right? So that's the level of detailing what SROI calls for. Yeah.
So social return on investment goes ahead and takes a couple of assumptions. The first assumption is that for-purpose organizations, especially and considering that we've now dealing with a lot of concepts, patient capital, long-term capital, etc., etc. What it essentially means is that your outcome and impact is something that's not going to be generated in 2 years or 3 years. It needs to be generated across 7 to 10 years. That's the fundamental first principle. But that doesn't mean that you can't design a program that is meant only for 3 years, where the outcomes are very, very specific and clear. For example, if you're designing a program where you're going ahead and working with school children in standard 2 in rural areas and they need to go to standard 3, there are certain kind of benchmarking parameters that they should be assigned to or aligned to. It could be the national educational policy, it could be learning outcomes, it could be in terms of going ahead and being self-sufficient in fundamental skills connected to mathematics, language, grammar, and so on and so forth. So you can still have a short-term program with a short-term set of outcomes, but how you design the program becomes extremely important for social return on investment. Hence the clarity of the difference between an output and an outcome. Social return on investment is only outcome focused, not output focused, not activities. All of them are expected to go ahead and lead to your designed, defined outcomes, right? I have a mentor, a Swedish mentor of mine, and he explained the difference between output and outcome in a very nice manner, right? We have these walks and talks kind of a thing, right? So he said, I asked him saying that we always, in the sector, we always confuse between outputs and outcomes. How do you define or make the distinction? He's saying that, Swami, assuming that you go ahead and buy a van from any car company, right? And you use the van to go ahead and drop off your kids, go ahead and do whatever you need to do later on. Those are all a set of outcomes using one output, which is the van. If the same van is being brought by a hospital and converted into an ambulance, then the set of outcomes are very different. The output is exactly the same, the van. How you use that van for what purposes and for what goals defines the outcome. A collection of outcomes is what defines the impact, right? So that brought a lot of clarity for me, and that's the clarity that the social return of investment, being outcome focused, wants to go ahead and bring to the table.
So thank you, Swami, and taking the conversation forward. So we've established a theory of change. Now, this is an interesting exercise. All of you should, I'm assuming you're doing it. If you're not doing it, one can always sit down, drives this series of input to outcome journey. But for the sake of the example, we are going to take one outcome as an indicative calculation set for you. And we are taking it as increased income generation. Yeah. Now, how do we understand this example better for assigning financial proxies? Now, this is step one where you start putting in the money or monetizing the outcome. Remember, we are just picking up one outcome because we have a limited set of time. Ideally, monetization of all the outcomes need to be done if you are conducting an end-to-end thorough SROI study. So if we have to look at one outcome, which is increased income, we are looking at it in terms of when the project ends, it is successful in increasing the income of to the tune of 5,000 INR per month per beneficiary. So if you are to assign a financial proxy, it is measuring the outcome, which is increase in average annual income, calculating number of participants. So 100 women per month, 5,000 rupees of income multiplied by 12 months. We can do the math. I think it'll keep you engaged. What's the number? Anyone? We will take questions. We will take questions. Not now, just because it's a gated session. So 60 lakh rupees of one outcome is generating social value. This is income. This is easy, right? Income, I knew I could see the transaction, but we knew the audience will be smarter, and we wanted to make it more technical. So we thought that let's talk about something which is qualitative in nature. Yeah? How does one put value to that? So we've also experienced there's an increased knowledge and skills of the woman, right? Because through the program, they ended up getting some sort of a certification, they picked up newer skills, which is helping them do better at their historic pickle making capabilities. But earlier, they used to make pickle, they were not making enough money, but now they're more confident, they know how pickle is sold, it can be packaged, there's Amazon, XYZ, right? So, how does one then look at it from a monetization aspect, right? So there are two ways to look at it. The first one is, in case the women beneficiaries had to pick up a similar skill set, if they had to go ahead and say approach a government center or some sort of a private coaching or some sort of an online YouTube course, they would have had to incur some sort of a monetary, right? So today, for instance, you've come to the conference, someone sponsored for it. Either you've put in your money, your organizations have spent it, but the larger outcome is that you end up networking more, you get more perspectives, you're learning out of this masterclass. So there's someone's bearing your cost. Now in this case, the funder is bearing that cost per woman. Alternatively, you can also look at as the opportunity cost, which you would have anyways gone ahead and spent time on. But for the sake of project-based calculations, we will look at all input value which has gone in from the funding side per beneficiary to quantify and assign the larger financial proxy that based on per beneficiary indicatively 10,000 rupees was my cost to the funder, to the implementing agency. They ended up training 100 women. So 10,000 into 100 then becomes your total investment value, which is going to be potentially saved by the women beneficiaries, right? So there are ways. This was straightforward again, but there are also elements which we've heard as problem statements that I'm in an education program. My child is not going to go ahead and earn income in grade 3, grade 4. How do I know that what sort of a financial value that sort of an input is going to create? There are ways to also do that. Then you look up the secondary sources or the primary sources which have been researched to tell that year-on-year intervention leads to employment linked to what the national basic salary is or a sectoral salary is, and that's how you draw back the larger potential financial value you're generating out of the program. So the broad aspect to cover was that qualitative outcomes can also be monetized. One could be directly based on how you structure the project, where you have visibility of putting in the money. Some could be long-term, which you will have to go ahead and use some of the national statistics or databases which are available. And that's allowed. Yeah.
So just to sort of step back a little and give a little more clarity, right? So I mentioned 3 dimensions earlier: capacity, capability, and agency. 3 different things, right? So for instance, I'm a program beneficiary, and I get certified to go ahead and make hygienic pickle. So there is a certain process in which the mangoes or the lemons have to be cut. I need to wear my gloves. I need to ensure that it's all clean, right? I need to be trained, and I'm certified to do that. That's capacity building. That certification is available to me. How do I use it as part of a larger value chain so that the value is created because of my certification is capability? Now you can look at your outcomes as capacity and capability, but if you don't have agency to exercise it, then you can have capacity, you can have capability, but there's no agency to exercise it. So your program design, it's better to go ahead and say that, is this outcome connected to capacity? Is this outcome connected to capability? Is this outcome connected to agency? Taken together, what are the set of outcomes and how does it lead to a financial proxy or a monetary value? That's one. Very quickly, direct cost is very clear. So you can do a direct cost and a direct impact. Indirect cost is always saved cost, opportunity cost saved. A woman who needs to be certified, if she had to go to the district magistrate's office or the district collector's office, district headquarters, that means she has to spend some money, she has to go ahead and work with the household, get that permission, etc., etc. But if there is a certification that's happening in the local panchayat office, organized by a program design, then that's opportunity cost, that's cost saved. So that can also be calculated. So that is what is called as financial proxy.
Yeah. So we want you to remember 60 lakh rupees for our final step. Don't forget that number. Coming back, now we're I guess in the last 10, 15 minutes of this, or 20 minutes of this masterclass. Unfortunately, so this session we've packed it into 1 hour, but we're gonna again take you through this main parts of the presentation, which is to attribute impact. Remember the principle, do not overclaim. So these are the 4 aspects which create the most level of technical chaos at times, I would say, because any SROI practitioner who comes across an impact calculation, while the financial proxy is there, but how does one do accurate attribution? So the 4 principles are attribution, deadweight, displacement, and drop-off. Attribution is clear, which is change that has been directly due to the program intervention. Remember the principle, do not overclaim. While the intervention is happening, how much as a funder can I take attribution to it? I don't think I can take 100% because there is an existing knowledge which the woman had how to make the pickle, right? They knew how, when to pick up the mango, when to cut it, when to dry it. So I can't say that I taught them how to make pickle, right? And it's subject to all the program designs. Similarly, in a government school, if I'm saying that I've changed the education system, no. The school was set up by the government. There was a policy influence. Can I take all 100%? No. So it's project to project. So for this example, we've taken 70%. Deadweight is change that would have happened even without the program being implemented. So if you're talking about income, while project specific, their income was 0 before, but they were making some sort of they had some sort of an income considering they are in a rural setup. It could be the Manrega scheme, it could be Shri Nidhi scheme, direct benefit transfer. There was some sort of an income which they were already getting in. Maybe their household was not just dependent on pickle making, right? So increase in income cannot be fully taken, and hence you always take a deadweight value. So we've taken a 20%, considering that there are existing government schemes which indicatively I just spoke about. So this can be again contextualized to different sectors, be it health, be it education, in a rural setup. And there are also urban examples. In the interest of time, if we have in the end, we can pick up some. Displacement, these are project outcomes that replaced or substituted non-project related outcomes. Now, this is something which is an interesting factor, that based on the intervention which the organization conducted, how are some of the other elements which have been displaced? So for example, women were fairly engaged in doing some sort of another activity, but due to your intervention, that activity is unfortunately stopped momentum, and that everyone's now engaged in pickle making, right? So there's some sort of a displacement which has happened towards other income generating activities for the women. Yeah. And here we are assuming that there is only a 10% displacement because it's a small population. Predominantly, they did not have much opportunities to do any sort of catered activities to earn revenue. And the last one is drop off. This is more around year-on-year interventions, that there could be instances where beneficiaries would drop off from your program. It could be local market conditions. It could be more people entered in the pickle making industry. They started doing better. The competition increased, or they had some sort of another element. So these are 4 key aspects which one need to take in terms of percentages when you do the final calculation set. Yeah.
So for those who are mathematically inclined, someone like me, they would say that, okay, fine, you know, if I add all of that, it's 115%. It's not 100%, right? So there is a certain reason as to why most of them, 70%, 20%, 10%, 15% are upper thresholds. Up to 15%, up to 10%, that's one. 2, here, it could be local skills, existing skills. So for instance, I'm from Tamil Nadu, I love avakai pickle, which is essentially mango pickle, right? Now, if I go ahead and say, Tamil Nadu, I'll go ahead and create a self-help group where there is already local knowledge available, there's mango available. If I do avakai pickle, that's fantastic, right? I can go ahead and put a full 30% there because that's local knowledge and community. But mangoes are also available in Safipur, in UP. Now, I want to go ahead and create a self-help group there and create an avakai pickle there, which means that I'll have to train the women in terms of the methods of avakai pickle making, right? There I can go ahead and take an attribution of as much as 70% for myself because I'm training the women from scratch on a set of certifications or a set of knowledge. So how you design the program is extremely important in terms of going ahead and taking attribution. That's one. Second, in terms of displacement, just give a specific example. Let's stick with the pickle factory. I go ahead and do a pickle factory. Remember, it says social economic environment. I go ahead and create a pickle factory where it's a self-help group. Women come together, they use their local knowledge, pool their local knowledge, do a collectivization, and then produce pickles, right? That's one way of going ahead and doing it. I say all of this is not required. I'm going to go ahead and mass produce pickles there. Then I'm going to go ahead and acquire land, get the women to be employed in that factory, give them a salary, right? Then my displacement value. So low displacement value is the SSG case of the first instance, where I'm already employing the local women and their local resources and increasing their income. The second is a factory mass production, where I'm turning them into workers and employees and giving them a salary, right? That would be a high displacement value, which means that I've taken over whole set of activities in employment that was already existing in the local system, and I've changed the local system, right? So these are threshold values, and hence it's 115%. But how you define the threshold value depending on your program and program design is what social return of investment is.
And now I'm going to invite my colleague Aditya, who's also a trained chartered accountant. As Swami mentioned, we have a skill set based approach, who's going to quickly take you through how the final calculations happen, specifically on total adjusted present value. Yeah, over to you, Aditya.
Yeah, sure. So I know there are a lot of numbers. There's a huge formula out there. Please bear with me a couple of minutes and we'll be all through it. So essentially, if we have to measure return for any single project, financial, non-financial, what are the aspects that we look at? One is especially the value that is generated. Let's just forget this example for once. We all invest in the stock market. What's your return? The value that you have generated over a period of time, and you compare it with the amount you had initially invested. That's the cost. Similarly, in this case, let's just stick to the value part for now. What is the value that this pickle making project is generating? We have to only focus on value that is directly generated, and specific focus on only, going back to the principles. And that means we have to take the attribution that we looked at in the last slide. We have to include attribution. And at the same time, we must be mindful to remove unreasonable attribution. That is very important because we do not want to overclaim on anything. SROI is, the principle is very strict on that. So the value we get after adjusting for attribution and unreasonable attribution is total adjusted present social value. So we understand total, we understand adjusted. Present, why is it called present? So a lot of projects, as it was earlier mentioned, may have been multi-year projects with outcomes over 5-10 years. There is a systemic way to discount the values of outcomes which you have assigned financial proxies to, which will be accruing, say, 10 years down the line, and bring them to the present value. We do that fairly regularly in the financial industry, and the same principle applies here. So that's what we are trying to get at, total adjusted present social value. And now we get together all the moving parts that we have looked at in the earlier slides. So total monetary value of identified outcomes is the 60 lakh rupees that we looked at, the financial proxy, which is multiplied by attribution. I know it's getting a bit technical. Please bear with me. Everything will be clear by the next slide. Attribution was 70%. We need to include attribution. So you multiply by 70%. The rest of it in the red bracket is unreasonable attribution. So we have to make sure to remove it. Everyone in the 10th grade maths, even before that, if we have to remove something and multiply it, we always subtract it from 1. That's the basic principle that we have used here. If I have to go further, in essence, what we are doing is we are not subtracting 20% from 1. We are multiplying it by 80. So our dead weight was 20%. So we have to remove that 20% and multiply it by 80. Displacement was 10%. So you have to multiply it by 90. And same for the drop off. It was 15%. So we multiply it by 85. Now coming to how do we get at these values, right? 20%, 10%, 15%. We have a set of existing methods that I'm sure everyone in this room in some way, shape or form has some experience in. Policy mapping, establishing control groups, which is very important if you have to measure dead weight, the control group. Focus group discussions, getting the stakeholder feedback, rolling out surveys and questionnaires. These are just some indicative methods. There's a lot more which we can do.
Yeah. So basically what Aditya is saying that someone smart did not sit on the desk and write these values if one had to do the project. These are research methods which the field, when deployed to go ahead and cover some of these values, uses techniques such as focus groups, look at certain policy interventions, what the stakeholders have said, looking at similar project benchmarks. If we had to say do an education program, mapping outcomes, you may look at a local state-wise benchmark or a Sweden or a Finnish ecosystem, right? If we had to benchmark it at a global level. Control groups, so for example, there is, if you are looking at hunger programs, right? One school which got the intervention, one school which did not get the intervention. So there are different statistical research methods which you use in order to arrive some of the statements. So we had just about 5 minutes left. And if we had to conclude the larger SROI ratio, the total adjusted present social value by total value of inputs. So 25 lakh 70,400 is what we got after doing the calculation in the last slide. 12 lakh rupees was project input, hence 2.14 as a ratio was generated. Now this is only for one outcome. If you had to look at the whole program, your outcomes keep added and the total financial value would have induced. So denominator would be consistent because it was just 12 lakhs. The numerator, of course, can increase, decrease based on what the other indicators have called for. So 2.14. So what the slide says here is that for every rupee spent, a social value of 2.14 has been generated, right? So earlier it was 80% women got 5,000 rupees of revenue XYZ. But you've eliminated that language now. You're talking in numbers. You're saying for every 1 rupee you put in the project, 2.14 times is what you create the monetary value. Very similar to your price to earning ratios if you're doing stock market. Yeah?
We've also taken a very simple example and kept it at the maximum threshold level, right? 70%, 10%, 20%. But those vary depending on how we have designed the programs and the kind of input cost that you have added, right? So we wanted to keep it simple, but we can take those complex questions when we do a Q&A. You can ask those questions, we'll be happy to answer.
So while 1 hour, of course, is the format of the class, it might not do justice to the topic, but we've tried to also then now do a post of feedback, maybe after these 55 minutes, that if you've spent time, if you've observed those 50 minutes, as a not-for-profit or a social enterprise, are you all resonating to the fact that SRO analysis provides a comprehensive view by examining both tangible and intangible outcomes? Some sense check after these 50 minutes that, okay, I was looking at impact in a different manner, but now I know that how can one monetize some of these programmatic impacts? Yeah. And this possibly can also lead to greater transparency, because if you look at this SROI principles, it's keeping up to all what any funder would expect, right? Board asks difficult questions. Are ye to pehle se hi ho raha hai? What did we do? This program's been running for 10 years. What new have we done? How do we give and communicate the impact, right? So the whole aspect of not overclaiming, being real, quantifying impact helps some of the funding ecosystem bridge the gap of more transparency and trust. These are two specific cases where we've also gone ahead and implemented our SROI work. We can't name the clients, but these are assessments which have provided some sort of key decision making for our clients to go ahead and take strategic decisions if they want to scale, maximize, or keep or maybe pivot towards a different impact strategy. And this has also helped some of them do financial fundraising. So all in all, tomorrow when you're going out in the market to scale your program, to raise funding, it's a great tool for you to showcase that while I'll have a qualitative impact, but an indicative SROI can help me give you a financial return as well. Why don't you go ahead and look at a blended finance approach for my program? And that differentiates you. Yeah. Indian adoption, as we said earlier, Ambuja Cement Foundation was one of the earliest organizations to go ahead and look at SROI adoption in the livelihood intervention. Godrej has done the embed program, where they've also presented a potential 12.57 for every 1 rupee generated. Tata Motors also has looked at community-based health intervention, and even Coca-Cola. So the Indian corporate ecosystem, be it at a GCC level, MNC level, are picking this trend up because some of these companies are also global in nature, and it helps them communicate their impacts at a common language. So this framework is being evolved and is up for grabs. So it's important that we take note of it and how some of the Indian ecosystem players are also adopting it. Well, globally, one can look at the big issue example, the Clockwise Credit Union, the IIX Women's Livelihood Bond, which is also being called as the Gender Bond, Orange Bond. So these are more from an impact investing lens, where it's driven from how some of these funding instruments are structured and not driven on solely philanthropic or CSR funding. Right? So if we had to summarize, how would you go ahead and integrate SROI with program design? So this is the last slide, and we're also wrapping up. It can help you go ahead and do improved decision making. So strategic planning is something which is a direct output / it's an output, not an outcome in fact. It's an output which one can look at using SROI, that how can you do data-driven analysis? So for example, if I want to run a 5-year program, I did an SROI for the first 2 years, my ratio somehow is skewing or not giving me the accurate results. Can I do a quick pivot? Can I go ahead and scale up my program, maybe put in more inputs, or start looking at my outcomes in a different way? Risk management, as Swami mentioned, that the social and environmental risks are also being looked at very carefully when we are doing a holistic program design. So SROI definitely, when you're doing the larger mapping, helps you understand that if an intervention is being rolled out, what sort of a potential social or environment economic risk it's bringing in, where the principles of displacement, dead weight sort of come in. Enhanced reputation and stakeholder engagement. It's a great brand differentiation, be it on the corporate side or be it on the implementing side. Nothing stops you from celebrating your programs by communicating impact in a measured way, monetary way, and you're also talking the language which some of the board members or some of the ecosystem players are now looking at from an impact measurement space. Increased access to social capital. So it's a pretty much plug and play. So if you're able to differentiate yourself, build that reputation, it is also helping you unlock social capital. So for instance, social stock exchange, which has come up to be a new instrument of raising finance, they are asking for impact measurement. They are asking on how are you going to measure impact. So if you're looking at a standard SROI methodology, it's a great impact driver and a trust builder to the audience. And that's what the retail investors also understand, right? When you say, what's this stock? Why should I buy it? Price to earnings ratio. So this is where you bring in the SROI principle. Great. And the future of SROI, it's a POV. It's still evolving. We see that integrated reporting and triple bottom line accounting, sooner or the later, organizations may tend to pivot towards comprehensively reporting their impact through a ratio basis coupled with stories, outcome-based funding and social impact bonds, standardization of impact. There are possible impact standards which will come in which may have expectations to look at theory of change more critically. How are you aligning to certain standards? The GRI framework, how you have in the sustainability space, can have a transition on even the impact space. And tech-enhanced impact measurement, which could be around AI, blockchain, where these technologies can actually help you get a real-time sense of some of these attribution, deadweight, displacement going forward. So Swami, anything to add since we are
No, I think
wrapping up?
we've covered it pretty much, and I want to sort of get some questions from the audience. So if you can, probably 3-4 questions, and then we can do that. If someone can give them the mic, yeah.
Hi,
I think there are 3-4 of them.
thank you guys. It's been a fantastic session. I had a couple of questions, and I'm coming from the corporate band. Yeah, so my name is Elvis. I'm from Gap Inc., the brand, retail brand. So I had a question on the indication outcome that you had included. You mentioned about education and knowledge and how you calculated through that. Typically, what we would also see, there are areas of impact around leadership, income and assets, time savings, health. And then there was a reference to also including family. The minute you use family, then there are 5x of all these aspects adding on. So how do you take that, and do you have to individually kind of continue calculating on all those parallel lines? That's one question. The second I had was, what we have seen as a corporate is the cost of evaluation, especially when you look at longitudinal studies. So does getting into an SROI calculation, does it actually increase or reduce the SROI itself because of your input cost going higher for the need of the study itself?
Possibly I'll pick up the question in the reverse order, right? The long and short of it is that it will increase your total monitoring and evaluation cost. By how much is completely dependent on a few things. If you are going ahead and doing a granting kind of a model, where you're granting it to a civil society organization, NGO, CBO, right? If you can put in an extra effort to go ahead and make your grant agreement very, very specific. These are the output indicators. These are the outcome indicators. This is the total impact. These are the kinds of monitoring, reporting, evaluation measures that we will do. And if you can either get the capability organized within the organization to go ahead and report back to you, so self-reporting, wherein you're then going ahead and reducing the amount of time that you're going to put in because your metrics are already clear, or you design the program so thoroughly that when you do put that effort, extra effort, the incremental cost will be higher, but it won't be higher where you end up doing something post facto, where you've done a program design, you've done a granting agreement, and then you've got the board asking you all sorts of questions, and then you try and do a post facto impact assessment. So it's more like designing your program in a way where it is very, very specific in terms of metrics upfront.
So would it be fair to say then that restricted grants versus unrestricted grants, does this work better on restricted grants?
It can work on both sides, right? So ultimately it depends on what kind of a program design do you have and what kind of outcomes are you sort of targeting, right? I can probably give you an example, right? And I can't take names. So let's assume that there are 2 foundations which are working on going ahead and increasing the productivity of pomegranates in India. Foundations, right? They've identified the correct geo-ecological, agroecological zone. They found, and there are a whole lot of competitive advantages, direct advantages available. One goes ahead and says that I want to ensure that the pomegranates are available in the Indian market. The second goes ahead and takes a higher outcome, saying that I want to go ahead and penetrate the European market and specifically the French outlets, very, very specific. People would know which organization I'm talking about, right? The second one will by default require, by default mean that your inputs are going to be a lot more. That's a program design. That's a program design strategic decision that you're taking, saying that I want a better value realization for every pomegranate, right? Hence your attribution is higher, your SORI number would be higher, but your input cost would also be higher, right? So often enough, it is the strategic mindset that needs to be brought in by the program team that then is also communicated to the board. But if you say that if I do this kind of a strategic design and look at pomegranate for the domestic market, my SORI potentially would be in this range, But if I go ahead and use the existing set of networks and actually reach out to France and some of the gourmet shops there, my SORI would be this, then it's a strategic decision that the board takes. For every incremental cost increase in input, I'm actually getting a better SORI, right? Depends, depends. Will not be at the higher threshold.
Yeah, one last question. Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly on the cost. See, on the again, it's a strategic call you'll take, right? If your third-party M&E cost is towards performance management of the program, it's around working with the stakeholders, improving outcomes, it's an input. But if you're saying it's a standalone independent organization, organizational assessment to help you calculate that SROI, that's a call you can take. It's not needed that you're putting it in as an input because it's a standby cost, right? It has nothing to do, that assessment has nothing to do directly with how an impact or an indicator changed in the beneficiary's life. So that's a call you'll have to take. So it is also a distancing approach. If suppose you put in any agency which is actually doing the performance management, training them, giving you reports, it's an input cost. But if you're measuring it, which is going to come after 2 years, you don't need to really even factor that input. Yeah? It's a distance approach.
Thank you. So this is a very insightful section. The other one question is that whatever the SORI shown actually for the Tata and is it audited by someone, and is it like there are multiple initiatives? How
Yeah,
they
so
can
some of them have been assured by a third party. So this, I cannot name it considering this is going to get recorded and it goes out in public domain and we hold a certain IP. But these all reports, not all, possibly Tata Motors has been assured. It has also been presented in INSEAD as a case study. And if you look at their 19, 20, 21 annual report, you will get the auditor's name also. So it's available, is what I'm saying. Others, you can, but it's conducted by a third party, is what we can say. But there's assurance also being done on that. We are aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you need to be a certified social auditor, for instance, and then there are specific certifications that you'll need to get. So just as you've got the ICFAI, IFRS, you've got certified social audit. So that's the strategic. It's a very sharp strategic question, I must say.
And the first regulation which you see is the mandatory impact assessment, which needs to be done by a third party. If the project size is 10 crores, while SROI is not a standalone mandate in that, but impact assessment anyways has become a assurance requirement. And BRSR eventually is also moving towards that phase with the reasonable assurance. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Neeraj Chandra. I operate a healthcare rural company, which is a tech-driven organization. So coming from both the sides and visiting about more than 6,000 villages, what I have seen is this SROI probably changes year on year. Now for the same project, which starts, so SROI for year one, maybe let's say is at a high level, but the moment you go to year 3, you come at about hardly 0.1 mark. The biggest reason what I've seen is in the dropout factor. So the beneficiaries, after that incentives are lost, the incentives are stopped, all the beneficiaries go off. So the real impact SROI, probably how should it be evaluated? Therefore, is it like a curve of next 5 years of this program? And therefore, should it be seen from whether it is increasing, staying stable, or going down? I mean, your views.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just quickly pick that up and then give it to you. So it's the Zomato Swiggy problem, right? You're doing customer acquisition, you're throwing in the money and getting in the customers, and then you want customer retention, nobody stays because the discounts on there, right? So just as it's a business model question in the corporate world, it is a program design question in the not-for-profit or for-purpose organization world, right? If you can define and design your program, then you're in the valuation game rather than a game of going ahead and having, customer acquired or beneficiaries acquired, right? So that's the short point that I would like to make. saying that you can have short-term outcomes, but that short-term outcomes by default then means that you can't go ahead and design your program and show outcomes and impacts that's 7 years or 10 years, right? By default, your program is only for 3 years or 2 years. And then you have an exit clause, right? And that's the way social return of investment is being implemented for projects to be listed on social stock exchange, not organizations, because social stock exchange, looks at projects and programs and not organizations. So then you're saying that zero coupon bond, for instance, is for 3 years. I'm asking for money so that I'm going ahead and developing or building the ecosystem or the market, right? So the SORI numbers by default will go down, right? But that's the whole idea. When you have retail investors, which we saw is 32%, and you want to increase it to 55%, they're not looking for any kind of a, how do I say? They're not looking for dividends in the traditional sense of the term. They're saying this is a requirement for India. There's someone who's going ahead and doing that, and I'm happy to put in that money, right?